Come there.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome the founder and chairman of XIME Bangalore, Professor J. Philip sir, chairman of XIME Kochi, Professor C.P. Ravindranathan sir, chairman of XIME Chennai, Dr. B. Muthuraman sir, vice president of XIME Society, Mr. Anil J. Philip, directors, deans, faculty members, staff of XIME Bangalore, XIME Chennai, and XIME Kochi, industry professionals, academicians, my dear fellow mates, and all who have joined online for today's budget discussion at XIME Bangalore. First of all, I would like to invite Professor C.P. Ravindranathan, the chairman of XIME Kochi, to start the session. Professor C.P. Ravindranathan was a member of Indian Foreign Service, and held various high positions, including Joint Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Consul General of India, Sydney, Australia, Ambassador of India to the Philippines, and High Commissioner of India to Australia. With this note, I would like to welcome Professor C.P. Ravindranathan to take over the session.
Chairman Professor J. Philip, distinguished panelists, Dr. Govinda Rao, Professor Ashok Tampi, and Ms. Sandhya, Professor Joy Uman, dear colleagues, and dear students. At XIME, we are very gratified by the thought that from the very beginning of this institution, the budget review has been an unwavering annual feature. We have had it every year, and we have always succeeded in bringing together on the occasions some of the best academic and professional resources to discuss the various aspects and ramifications of the budget. And over the years, we have had very good feedback on this exercise. So we are having another such budget review this year as well. Every budget is important, although people say these days that budget does not command the same measure of overwhelming national importance we used to have at one time. For example, there was that legendary Palkhiwala who used to address on the effects of the budget from the Bombay Stadium. And the stadium was full because the audience those days was full of passionate curiosity as to the details of the budget and more what Mr. Palkhiwala had to say on this. Today, with the change in the whole scenario of media information and the general proceedings or on the budget in these matters, and the change of scene, let us face it also, with regard to the budget politics. Today, it's a different situation altogether. So people do not assume, attach as much importance to the rhetoric or discussions on the budget as in the past. But that having said, there is no question but that the national budget is of central importance to our country. Even if a budget may not be very important in terms of announcement of measures which affect our welfare, our pocketbook, our disposable income and all that, there are many more important details for which the budget is still noted. Today, more and more, it is a statement of the government's policy, government's strategy of economic growth, and how government is going to reconcile, the national revenue and expenditure. What is the importance the government attaches to capital expenditure, which is the mainspring of economic growth, and what are the components of that capital expenditure, and what is going to be the impact of the budget on national welfare in terms of yearly installments. So for these aspects, budget will continue to assume importance. Now, the lineaments of this year's budget are well known. I don't need to tell you anything much about that by way of introduction. We all know that it's a budget which has to address two important features of the national economic environment. One, reduction in final private consumption is a major malaise of the economy at the moment, which should be addressed in critical terms. The other is the need for more capital expenditure, because capital expenditure alone can provide a much needed impetus to our economy and assure for us a high rate of economic growth. A high rate of economic growth is a matter of life and death for India in the coming years, because the demographic dividend, because of the time we have lost due to COVID, because of the critical nature for growth in many important sectors. So our concern vis-a-vis this budget is how much this budget will promote consumption, which in Indian economy is the main force of growth, output, and economic performance in general. And two, how it creates future income, future development, and future transformation through investment. And investment, there is no question but that countries like India will have to follow an investment-led economic strategy. China is a major example, and China has secured giant strides because of its unstinting emphasis on investment. I wish we had done it much more over the years, but we have our own constraints. Being a free market economy, following democracy, we cannot aggressively follow an investment-led economy by mobilizing resources with the same relentlessness as China can do. So this budget, addressing these two concerns, is quite a significant exercise. Some people would say that perhaps more should have been done to step up consumption under this budget. That is something which our panel will discuss, by putting more income in the hands of the people and by spending more, especially on things like on programs like National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, capital expenditure is a very promising item. The prime importance given to capital expenditure in this budget. It is up by 24% from the last year's budget. And it comes to about 7.5 lakh crores of rupees. That combined with the grant in aid to the states of over 1 lakh crore of rupees is a major chunk of capital expenditure. We should hope that this capital expenditure will make much difference to our economy in the days and months to come. And this is a most remarkable feature of this budget, and we have every reason to feel hopeful that it will have its desired impact. But what are the constraints this budget faces in the coming years? One, we have made a few assumptions. Let us hope that those assumptions will remain in the coming months. That is, the monsoons will behave, that pandemic will not trouble us anymore, that the global monetary situation with regard to capital flows and so on will remain better, in view of many central banks trying to curb liquidity now. And then, of course, supply disruptions, as happened till very recently, would not again create problems for the economy, and inflation. So these, let us hope, will not affect the beneficent aspects of the budget. Otherwise, I think this is an important feature of the budget, and because of the fact that outlay on infrastructure will certainly give rise to job creation, increased economic activity, and it will also act as a stimulus to private investment. Private investment has picked up in this financial year, and there'll be more of it in the coming years. And the increased public outlay for investment will act as a further stimulant to private investment. So with that, we should expect significant results to happen in the economy in the coming months. But of course, it all depends on execution, and that is up to the virtual needs of Mr. Woman. The execution, I think that is where India has always failed. We have great plans. Every year we have one plan or the other, very impressive sounding, but how much of these have really been translated into to reality? I think that's a question we all need to ask the government and ourselves. So the execution, I'm afraid, leaves a lot to be desired. So these capital investment projects, unless you go into even the granular details of execution, we cannot have much optimism about these very impressive schemes. For example, the government is proverbially very tardy in payment of its bills, even sundry bills, not to speak of what has to be paid to people in huge projects, and the approval of projects, clearances, and final. Today we are speaking of the budget outlays. When are those outlines going to be translated into roads and harbors and airports and so on in this country? It's going to take a very, very long time. Some years ago, we had a Chinese economist who came here and who teased us about the Chinese speed in implementation. And he very subtly said that we should perhaps emulate the Chinese speed of execution of projects. If we have something with that speed, and if we can pick up our outlay, as envisaged in this budget, with that same urgency, efficiency, I think it would make a lot of difference to our economy. So best of luck to ourselves. So far as the execution is concerned, the philosophy is impeccable. The philosophy behind this budget is unexceptionable. There's a lot to be said for that, but let us hope that execution will match the promise of these very impressive budget outlay. Well, with that words, I think I've already exceeded the time given to me, but I think on this occasion, it is just as well one is a bit enthusiastic and hopeful about the budget. So I might as well, I may not have done, I would not have done much harm, I hope, in exceeding the time allotted to me. Now, with these words, let me step aside and let the rest of the program roll on, we have next the introduction of the panel members by Yasmin.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm well pleased to welcome our panel members, Dr. M. Govindarao, Professor Ashok Thampi, Ms. Sandhya J., and Professor Joy Woman for today's budget discussion at XIME, Bangalore. Now, I would like to give a brief introduction about our panel members. Firstly, I would want to start with Dr. M. Govindarao, sir. Dr. M. Govindarao worked as the director at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. His past positions include director at Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and fellow research at School of Pacific and Asian Studies, Australian National University, Canberra, Australia, and professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Dr. Rao has a number of advisory roles. He is a member of Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India with the rank of Minister of State, Government of India. He is a member of Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission and High-Level Expert Committee on Universalizing Healthcare. He is a member of High-Level Expert Committee on Efficient Management of Public Expenditure. He is also a member of Advisory Group of Eminent Persons to advise the Finance Minister on G20 matters. He has served earlier as a member of 14th Finance Commission. A warm welcome to you, sir. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Ashok Thampi. Professor Thampi's area of interest are corporate finance, financial risk management, industrial economics, banking, and regulation. He teaches corporate finance and banking in the MBA and executive education programs at IIM Bangalore. Sorry. Thank you very much, ma'am. Professor Ashok Thampi teaches corporate finance and banking in the MBA and executive education programs at IIM Bangalore. Prior to joining IIM Bangalore, he was at the Department of Finance, Bilkent University, Turkey. He has also held visiting positions at the Department of Economics at Santa Clara University, USA, and the School of Business, Economics and Law at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. When it comes to his education, Professor Ashok Thampi completed his PhD in economics from Krannert Graduate School of Management, Purdue University, which is in USA. In the year 1994. Then he completed his MA in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India, in the year 1990. We are happy to have you here, sir. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Sandhya J. Sandhya ma'am joined Narayana Health as the Group CFO in December 21. Prior to joining Narayana Health, Sandhya ma'am was the Global Head of Audit, Risks, and Ombuds for Wipro Enterprises. Before this, she was with Wipro Limited as the CFO for the Consumer Business Unit. Prior to joining Wipro, Sandhya worked for more than 12 years with Hindustan Unilever across finance and IT. Her last role being the Global Controller for Enterprise and Technology Solutions. She was placed in India's top 100 women in finance by AIWMI and awarded thrice by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India as a CA CFO of the Year. She was placed in the top 50 young leaders in India by Economic Times as well. We welcome you, ma'am. Now, I would like to welcome Professor Joy Oman, the retired IAS officer. Professor Oman is a former Chief Secretary of Chhattisgarh and is currently Honorary Professor at XIME, Bangalore. He has over 3 decades of highly distinguished service with central and state government of Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Kerala. He served as chairman of Power Companies of Chhattisgarh and as the founder chairman of Naya Raipur Development Authority, which planned and developed the new capital of Chhattisgarh. He has also served as vice chairman of International Silk Association and on the governing board of Indian Institute of Management, Raipur. He is a postgraduate in economics from University of Kerala and has masters in development economics from University of East Anglia, UK. Welcome, sir. One important announcement to the audience. Whoever has any questions or queries can post your questions in the Q&A section, which is available on the app. So please do that. Now I would request Professor Joy Oman, the moderator, to start the proceedings.
Hello and good afternoon to everyone. Professor J. Philip, Chairman of Xavier Institute of Management, Bangalore. Ambassador Sri C.P. Ravindranathan, Dr. M. Govindrao, economist, Professor Ashok Thambi, Ms. J. Sandhya, Mr. Anil Philip, Vice President of the XIME Society, all my faculty colleagues, all our guests who have joined from different places online, and all who are present in the auditorium here today, all dear students. I'm happy to welcome all of you to this session and along with you, look forward to a very fruitful afternoon of discussions on the Union Budget 2022-23. Ambassador Sri C.P. Ravindranathan has indeed saved me a lot of work in explaining the background, the basic philosophy of this budget already. And I think as moderator, I would exercise all the possible moderation on my side and be as brief as possible. I would at the same time mention that in no other country in the world, perhaps, we get to see so much hype, so much drama, suspense, secrecy, and such pure anticipation when it comes to the annual budget in our country. In the run-up to the budget, we get to see for many weeks in newspapers, on TV channels, and now in all the web channels, any number of discussions, blogs, recommendations for the finance minister, and analysis of what needs to be done, all that. We also know that there are customary meetings of industry and trade representatives with the finance minister well in advance before the budget. Towards the final days, we even get to see some predictions coming of what is going to come in the budget. We would almost think the budget papers had got leaked. And then finally, when the papers come, a lot of people are quite nonplussed as to what exactly has happened. But fortunately, in our country, people forgive and forget quite fast and wait forward to the next budget. But all the same, we should mention that in a large and diverse country like India, some of this anticipation and all these expectations can be understood. And probably the only thing that we sometimes worry is the kind of touching faith our people have in finance ministers, despite not much evidence coming forth that they have been either listening or anticipating all their expectations in true faith. After the budget, I think at least one of the leading industry leaders said the best thing he liked about the budget was its brevity. And that probably he was being indeed quite polite. When I tried to check with a friend on what was the best few takeaways from this budget, he messaged back to me, said that he is buying a new pair of glasses and would get back to me very soon. I'm sure that we shall no doubt understand this year's budget much better after we listen to the three eminent people on our panel, Dr. Govind Rao, Professor Thambi, and Ms. J. Sandhya. Though Ambassador Ravindranathan has already given you a background of this year's budget, I would just like to recount a few more things for us to keep in our mind as we listen to the discussions that follow. Firstly, we know that this budget is being presented in the midst of what we call the third wave of a pandemic. There is no certainty that we are going to see more variants or more waves in the immediate future. So we keep wondering if we have a plan ready through this budget to face any crisis that may come up in the immediate future, if not in the next 25 years. And secondly, we all know that even as we see some green shoots relating to growth before us, that what we call economic growth in our country has been very uneven in the last few years in particular. And if we go by the latest World Inequality Report or the Oxfam report or the recent household survey report of ICE 360, we know that the poor in the country are getting increasingly marginalized. So we keep wondering whether all these new proposals we have in the budget are going to make a difference to their lives. Thirdly, we know that the budget has come in the midst of some elections to the state assemblies. The finance minister has indeed received some praise for not announcing any populist measures, in spite of, I'm sure, the many convulsions that would have come upon her. But we need to keep in mind that ever since the elections got announced, the petrol and diesel prices have not gone up at all. The private and public sector companies have all withheld the price increases for some time, even as the international prices of crude has been going up. So we have to wait for the polling to end to see what is going to happen to the diesel and petrol prices and what difference it's going to make on inflation in our country. Fourthly, we need to also realize that the budget is also coming at a time when there is some turmoil in the international political and economic scenario. For one, we have already started seeing how our stock markets have been reacting even to an announcement that the Federal Reserve is considering some changes in the interest structure. We also know that there is considerable tension between Russia and Ukraine, and the results of it on the oil markets and stock markets and exchange markets are something which we need to keep in mind. With that, I think I would now request Professor M. Govind Rao, one of India's leading economists, to throw some light on these and any other issues that he thinks are important for us to know. Thank you. Mr. Govind Rao.
Thank you, Professor Omen. Let me, Professor Philip, Ambassador Ravindranathan, my other fellow panelists, faculty, and students of XIME, thank you very much for inviting me to this important discussion on the union budget. This is the season for economists. Sort of everybody is busy basically trying to understand what are, between the line issues as far as the budget is concerned. I'm going to be basically focusing on the macroeconomic issues in the budget. Let me start with the initial conditions that has been already talked about by both Professor Waman and Ambassador Ravindranathan. But let me start the thing that the finance minister has to take into account while preparing the budget. The most important thing is that economy is still on a revival mode. It is yet to reach the full potential. Capacity utilization still has to be there. We had first advance estimate of GDP growth at 9.2%, but even before the ink was dry, in fact, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation revised it to 8.6%. So it's, although the finance minister continued to talk about 9.2%, just that morning on the February 1st, they had revised it to 8.6%. Well, 8.6% is not a bad number, but what it means is that we are basically almost, sort of the level of income would be almost as much of 2019-20. It's not, so there hasn't been any growth, in the incomes in the last couple of years. Pandemic is still on the rage. There is an issue of rising unemployment. And Professor Omen talked about rich getting richer and poor getting poorer, and economists call it a K-shaped recovery. There are issues of declining investment. And interestingly, saving is not declining. That's because people are saving for, it's a precautionary motive saving that has been happening. And, of the four growth engines, except for export, everything else is stuttering. Now, public investment has been a little more in 2021-22, and therefore that's something which is this thing. But then the private investment is not really increasing at the rate. I mean, they're talking about commercial lending picking up, but that has not picked up as yet. Private consumption has been declining. Government consumption has not been increasing much. So the only thing, the growth engine that is working is that of exports, and that's not a very big, very powerful growth engine anyway in our country. Another important issue that has already been talked about, tightening monetary policy in the advanced West. Now that can destabilize the financial markets in the country, because there could be a lot of sort of international finance going out of the country, because the interest rates will rise there, and then obviously there will be there will be outflow of foreign capital. But at the same time, it is expected that, I mean, it's hoped that the disruptions caused by that would not be as much as it was during the taper tantrum in 2013. And then that happened, there was a huge problem in India, including sort of sharp increase in the interest rates, and then price increases and all that. And there is concern within the country about rising prices as well, although consumer prices are below the targets, the RBI's monetary policy target of 6%. I mean, upper end of the target, which is 6%. You have, the wholesale price index has been very high, and even the implicit price deflator, because the first advanced estimate said that the nominal growth rate is 17.6%, real growth is 9.2%, the difference is 8.4%. So in fact, inflation is a concern, and then RBI has been mopping up excess liquidity, and this year we may see some some interest rate increases. The dilemma of the finance minister at this particular juncture is she has a very limited fiscal space for expansion. So you need to increase into investment, you need to increase social sector spending, you need to address the issues of inequality. But one must also note that union budget is not everything. In fact, 60% of the actual spending at the ground level is done by the states. It's only the union government. Of course, there is a transfer from the union to the state, but then in this country, the state budgets don't get as much of an attention as the union budget is. So the dilemma is that with the limited fiscal space, she has the task of boosting, public consumption and public investment. But then there are the limits set by the FRBM targets. So even with the FRBM target, she has to adhere to the FRBM targets and yet spend more to revive the economy. What are the major features of the budget? She has done well to increase the capital expenditure, as everyone else has been saying. The capital expenditure has increased by something like 1.5 trillion or 1.5 lakh crore, from 6 lakh crore to 7.5 lakh crores. Now, you need to go a little deeper to see what exactly is this additional spending. Out of the 7.5 lakh crore, 1 lakh crore is the money that she is advancing to the states for it's a 50-year loan at a 0 rate of interest. And interestingly, that 1 lakh crore doesn't get counted in the fiscal deficit of the center, because you borrow and you are on lend. So it actually will feature in the fiscal deficit of the states. It doesn't get into the fiscal deficit of the center. So if you take that out, the increase is just about 0.5 lakh crore. Now, what are the areas that of course, there are, if you include the public sector enterprises contribution to this capital expenditure, it becomes 12 lakh crore versus 11 lakh crore, so 1 lakh crore more this year. So there is no other increase, in that sense of the term. Now, in terms of the percentage of GDP, the increase of 6 to 7.5 lakh crore is 2.6% to GDP to 2.9% of GDP. Now, what are the areas that have been impacted more? As I mentioned, 1 lakh crore given to the states doesn't count in the fiscal deficit numbers because it becomes a fiscal deficit number for the country. But nevertheless, obviously, in the aggregate fiscal deficit, that figures. Now, if you really do a calculation, as I said, if you exclude that, increase in capital, this thing is about 50,000 crore. And the reduction in the fiscal deficit this year is from 6.9% of GDP to 6.4%. So where have been the increases? Which are the areas where the increases have been done? As I mentioned, 1 trillion has been given to the states. Increase is mainly in railways, which is about 30,000 crore, and roads, which is about 66,490 crore. Now, other sectors are either there is a marginal increase or decline. And there are a couple of things Mrs. Sitaraman mentioned in the budget speech. Allocation to tap water scheme, Nal Se Jal. She said she is allocating 60,000 crore, and affordable housing, another 48,000 crore. But these are not increases. These are the programs already existing. And the increases have been very marginal. There hasn't been much of an increase. I mean, it's nice to listen to these numbers in the budget speech, but there's hardly any increase there. But the more important thing is, these are not counted in the capital expenditure. Somebody asked me, how come this is not capital expenditure? They are compared, so they become capital expenditure for the country as a whole. But they are actually under the centrally sponsored scheme, these are actually transferred to the states as grants. And these grants cannot be counted as capital expenditure. They are actually in the revenue expenditure side, but the states will use them as capital expenditure. I mean, these are some of the complications, but the fact of the matter is, there is not much of an increase in capital expenditure, there. I mean, in fact, there has not been much of an increase in the expenditure there. Now, let me come to the next question of this fiscal deficit reduction from 6.9% of GDP to 6.4% of GDP. Now, the 15th Finance Commission has made a recommendation that fiscal deficit has to be brought down from 2021 to 2021-22 to 2025-26. And last year in the budget speech, the finance minister has said that she will bring it down to something like 4.5% of GDP from the level that existed then, or 8% of GDP. The Finance Commission recommended, they had 3 scenarios. If the economic recovery is slow, they could adhere to the path to bring it down to 4.5%. If it is normal growth, then it should be brought down to 4%. And if the growth is much better, it should be 3.5%. So she had last year itself chosen the path that recovery is slow and then 4.5%. But even according to the Finance Commission's recommendation for 2022-23, the fiscal deficit should have been 5.5%. So we do have 6.4%, but then she has also stated in the budget speech that the end target she will keep in mind, and then that means that the speed of adjustment in fiscal deficit reduction will have to be more in the coming years. How was this financed? How the entire thing is financed? Of reducing where exactly is the saving made in order to achieve this 0.5% reduction in fiscal deficit? Now, as I mentioned, additional spending given to the state, money given to the state doesn't add up to fiscal deficit, so there is no problem there. Now, revenue projections have been reasonably, sort of conservative. If you consider the revised estimates of 2021-22, in fact, total revenue growth is estimated at 6.4%, and tax revenue growth is estimated at 9.6%. But then if you consider the budget estimate of the 2021-22, the revenues are expected to rise by 23.3%, and taxes are supposed to rise by 25%. I mean, these are, but then let us hope that the revival, the buoyancy that was exhibited last year will continue this year. So I would not quarrel on that, and then possibly we will be able to cover the ground, and we will be able to collect as much revenue. And actually, non-tax revenues are seen to be declining because they have taken lower dividends from the public sector enterprises and lower dividend from even the Reserve Bank of India. So in that sense, revenue projections have been realistic. But what about the expenditure side? And of course, they have realistically projected the disinvestment proceeds as well. In fact, the disinvestment next year is supposed to be less than the the revised estimate of the current year. Now, the most important thing that has happened, in other words, reduction in the fiscal deficit has come about by reducing expenditures. Which are the areas that the expenditures have been reduced? The food subsidy has been reduced by 79,838 crores. And fertilizer subsidy has been reduced by 34,900 crore. And of course, there is also reduction in the outlay for Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee. And so obviously something like 25,000 crore has been reduced. Of course, they say that this is an outlay which basically depends on the demand for work, and then they are hoping. Of course, the assumption now is that there will be normal, situation soon, and there will not be any serious problem, and then the new variants of the pandemic is not going to affect much, and then there will be not much of a demand for Narega work, and therefore they have kept it at that level. So obviously, going further, we have to see. Now the question is, are we really, will the government be able to really contain the deficits, contain the subsidies? I'm one of those persons who always believes that subsidies create a lot of distortions. In fact, giving cash transfers is always better than subsidizing commodity. And in that sense of the term, the trend towards reducing subsidy is a good idea. But then, this has, sort of how this is going to be played out politically is something which needs to be seen. Because there are no increase in cash transfers. As I said, Narega funds have been reduced, and there are no sort of significant increase in cash transfers. And then even allocations to education and healthcare have been on the hold, and then that have been reduced. Now the question is, am I so much worried about reduction in the health and education? I'm afraid not. The reason is very simple. If you really look at it, 85% of the spending on education and healthcare actually comes from the states. Now so this is a thing that the state, in fact, health is basically a state subject. The centrally sponsored schemes have been basically created, and and then the money has been given. Is health not important? Is very important. Definitely, it's one of the most important things at the moment. Education is the most important thing at the moment. The ways have to be found to deal with this particular issue, particularly strengthening the primary health care, the sub-centers, public health centers and community health center is the most important thing. The focus over the years in this National Health Mission has been, going into this Ayushman Bharat in the name of that, insurance. Now, I think poor people can't really deal with that. The demand for tertiary healthcare will be substantially reduced Monte, I'll call you later. Sorry, I mean, that was Monte Carlo alias, so my apologies. So obviously demand for tertiary healthcare will be less if you have a much better network of possibly they could have given more to primary healthcare. And in any case, 15 Finance Commission has substantially increased it, and they have to maintain at that level. Now, so what are the major takeaways from this? There has been a significant increase in capital expenditure, at least, if you take central and states taken together, and the reduction in the subsidies. And then, of course, there is an attempt at containing the fiscal deficit. There are obviously concerns about social sector spending. Before I conclude, I just want to say one thing. This 1 lakh crore given to the states, some of I think it's a very important thing. The state's infrastructure is bad, and it's good that they've. But then you also should know that the money is fungible. It's not necessary that the states will increase their outlay on capital investment by getting this 1 lakh crore. What they will do is the capital expenditure they would have done otherwise, they will substitute to this particular thing. So, this gives them additional cushion. I hope even if they substitute it, I hope they will spend more on healthcare and education. Now, other thing, most important thing is that somebody said, we are all very good at planning, and but then implementation is the key. Unfortunately, we have not been good at it. I hope we will do that better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Thank you in particular for bringing to our notice that where some of the reductions have happened is in the case of food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, and in the rural employment guarantee scheme. And also, what exactly is happening in the case of capital expenditure as it is described. We keep wondering whether all this capital expenditure on railways or on national highways and expressways is really going to bring about employment on the scale that we would have seen if even a part of that allocation could have been given to the rural employment guarantee scheme. Anyway, thank you very much, sir, for explaining some of these intricacies of budget to all of us. I would now request Professor Ashok Thambi to focus on industry and trade and what this budget means for these sectors in particular. We know that there have not been any new tax announcements, especially affecting the corporate sector. But I'm sure the only new tax which has been announced
I was actually speaking in a panel discussion. So, yeah,
is about the tax on crypto assets. Many of our young students are quite fascinated by what is happening in the crypto world. And I hope you would also try to explain to them what is this new tax about and how it is going to affect the cryptocurrency and blockchain technology developments happening in our country. Professor Thambi.
Thank you, Professor Umen, Professor Philip, Ambassador Ravindranath, my co-panelists, faculty of XIME and students. Very happy to be here with you this afternoon to share some thoughts on the budget. And as was earlier remarked, we are a country that spends a lot of time examining the nuances and details of the budget at great detail, and how it affects our lives, whether our income after taxes would be left with something more, or will we have to pay more on something, and so on. So there's a lot of attention given to the budget, as well as it also affects the way in which the direction of the economy could move, and different sectors of the economy could be affected. So, for example, a particular favorable tax treatment for a specific industry in terms of customs duties, GST, earlier the excise, all of these could mean that some sectors have some favorable impact versus others where the impact could be negative, right? So there's been a lot of need to track the nuances of the impact of the budget over the years, particularly because we were a highly regulated economy. In some ways, we have been moving away from fine-tuning or playing around with the tax rates with every budget, and I think that's a welcome move because it gives stability and visibility to what the tax regime would be going forward, and investors, businesses can also plan much better if there is some confidence that the tax regime is not going to change significantly in the future. So before I get into some of my thoughts on the budget, actually during this last 1 year, one of the issues that affected the tax regime in the country, which was the retrospective tax, that was repealed. And that provides some clarity to a lot of the transactions that were under litigation. And so in that sense, there is a little bit more clarity for investors who are looking at making significant investments or acquiring assets in India. So of course, that happened outside the budget, but it does affect the way investors view India as a country for their money. Now, it was mentioned and by earlier speakers, Professor Govindarao, we have been coming out of a fairly bad patch in terms of the economy, where we had a significant contraction in the economy 2 years back, particularly with the first wave, and we are just coming out of it. And net, we are where we were about 2 years back. It's not as if we have, progressed beyond where we were as an economy in terms of GDP and so on, from what we were in 2019-20. So having said that, there's been a significant dip in some sectors, and some sectors which have significantly overcome the challenges of the last 2 years. So if you look at these sectors and the components of the economy that have been most adversely affected, it is the private consumption. So if you look at the numbers from the economic survey, the private consumption declined last year in 2020-21 by about 9%, and it has revived by 6.9%, but net effect is that we are still below what we were in 2019-20. So what this means is that the government has, and while private consumption has come down, the government consumption has picked up a little bit of that slack in pulling the economy out of the slowdown. And of course, the capital formation has just about recovered. So if you look at this, we are also, getting into the 2020 slowdown and the lockdown and so on. As an economy, we were just recovering from a big NPA problem, which was possibly a result of the lending and the expansion that happened in the previous cycle. And a significant part of the cleanup in the bad loan proportion in the banking sector has happened. And so today, the banking sector and the ability to lend in terms of capital adequacy ratios and so on are much better. So let me look at some of the sectors where there's been significant impact, right? And we all know that the hotel hospitality sector has been very, very adversely affected, right? People talk about recovery in the form of a K-shaped recovery. So some sectors and some segments of the industry have revived very well, whereas some others have gone down, being the lower part of the downward sloping part of the letter K. So if you look at the industry as a whole, and we see that, particularly the large corporates have been announcing increased profits and so on. A big part of the economy is the informal sector and the micro, small and medium enterprises. Now, their ability to cope with the logistical challenges posed by the lockdown and the resultant challenges that have happened because of the COVID-related disruptions have been a lot less, partly because they don't have as much of resources as the large companies. And so this sector has been very, very adversely affected. And so the government has, through the Reserve Bank of India, done significant effort to provide support to these sectors, and partly also through interventions in areas such as housing and infrastructure, which hopefully have a multiplier effect on other parts of the economy. So there has been a lot of effort on this regard, and a lot of the support has come in the form of credit guarantees, right? And these credit guarantees is something that, in a sense, wouldn't show up on the balance sheet till actually the credit doesn't go well. So there is, in a sense, there is significant credit guarantees that has been given, which could potentially come on the balance sheet of the government, because right now the lending has happened by the banks. So, for example, the micro, small and medium enterprises, the moratorium has resulted in a large number of micro, small and medium enterprises availing this moratorium, as well as the restructuring of MSME loans that was allowed after the August 2020 and May 2021. So if you look at the restructured portfolio, that comes to about 78,591 crores, right? And a large part of it is with the public sector banks. So clearly there has been a significant pain at the micro, small and medium enterprise level, which required a large number of them to avail of the this restructuring available to them. In fact, when it says something like 77% of MSMEs availed of this moratorium. And if we look at the emergency credit lines that has, and these are 100% guaranteed funding. that comes to about 2.28 lakh crores. And a big part of it has been to micro, small and medium enterprises and so on, and also to the micro credit institutions and so on. So, there is a lot of credit that has been extended to support these units during the last 2 years. And we would know the outcome of these credit guarantee schemes and so on only going forward. Maybe in a year or so, we will get a sense of how they have revived, or how is their ability to repay these credit that has been extended to them to support their survival. Now, that is a huge, let us say, a contingent liability that has been there, because we will know if it actually becomes good loans or bad loans and so on, what proportion of them would turn bad only maybe this year, going 2022, 23. So, but the good thing is the banking sector, as I mentioned, is in a much better financial position today, and including the public sector banks, because the provision coverage ratio that the public sector banks have had to maintain are much higher than what they were a few years back. Also, the capital adequacy ratio is fairly comfortable. And this has meant that in this current budget, there's been no recapitalization provided for the public sector banks. The other, so clearly there has been various, proposals in terms of increasing credit availability to the MSME and the hospitality sector and so on. And these would be possible ways to get them over the hill. Hopefully, data suggests that the mobility has improved. People are traveling a lot more. And so hopefully things would look up for this sector going forward. The government has also, interestingly, as Professor Govindarao mentioned, they're much more realistic in terms of what they could raise through disinvestments. So interestingly, the funds from disinvestment that has been projected for the coming year is less than what has been in the revised estimate for 2021-22. So that is interesting. And they haven't mentioned about any disinvestment specifically in terms of public sector banks or insurance companies, which they had mentioned earlier. So, that is something that we will have to look at later in terms of whether there is any proposal that they are considering. And it's also surprising, given that the LIC IPO is pending, and so this is going to be something significant in terms of revenue raise for the government. Now, one aspect of this budget that people have been talking about is that how are they going to fund it? And a significant part of the funding is through market borrowings. So the market borrowing in 2021-22 estimated to be 8.76 trillion rupees. And this is expected to go up to 11.59 trillion. Now, what this additional market borrowing would mean is that the interest rates would start going up, irrespective of the changes in the international interest rate regime, with the whether the Fed and the European central banks and the other central banks start tightening. The increased market borrowing that has been projected will mean that interest rates in the economy will rise, and therefore the pressure on the public sector banks and the private sector banks, the banking sector in general, to fund this borrowing requirement of the government would mean that there could be diversion of funds from the crowding out of the private sector. So that is one issue, right? So, that is one concern, which, and again, as interest rates rise, the small and medium enterprises would be the one that might be more affected. So there are those concerns, and we will know more about how this credit guarantee schemes will work out maybe in the coming year. But I don't see any provisioning for the contingent liability that is being created through these credit guarantee schemes and so on. Overall, I think the expenditure on infrastructure and the housing and so on, which has been provided for, some which have been maintained, marginally increased, will have a positive effect. There are some schemes, like, for example, paying of bills in time by the government agencies, that will speed up, hopefully, the working capital cycle of the MSMEs, and that will hopefully improve their liquidity position. That's it from me for now. Thank you very much. Look forward to the hearing from the other panelists and the questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ashok. You have given us a lot of inputs on what this budget means for the banking and insurance sector. Thank you very much. I would now request Ms. Sandhya to come in. She has hands-on experience in the corporate sector, especially in the technology world, and we look forward to hearing from her what it means for the corporate sector in general, and maybe the technology sectors, with all the emphasis on digital economy in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Philip, Ambassador Ravindranath, Professor Unmen, Dr. Rao, Professor Thampi, dignitaries. Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. So when I was in school, we used to have this thing called, on the Teachers' Day, students would normally dress as teachers and, take classes for smaller classes. So today I stand here with the people on the dais and off the dais, like when the principal and the class teacher comes and sits in the last bench to see how you're performing. I feel like that standing here today amidst all the dignitaries here. And so I'm really very, very grateful for giving me this privilege and opportunity. And going on to the budget, I think I cannot, explain the budget better than what has already been spoken about. So I'm choosing to focus on some of the micro aspects of how this budget could span out in certain sectors. So firstly, I want to share a perspective on the cost of logistics in India. If you compare with global standards, cost of moving anything in India is about 400 to 500 bips more. So our logistics costs is, I think, about 14% of GDP. The international standard will be less than 9%. Now, our cost of supply chain is high because historically, we've used manufacturing as a tool to create employment across the country. So the let me take an example of the cup of tea that you drink in the morning. Probably it is getting made in a tax-free zone in Silvassa in Maharashtra or in Baddi. The original tea will move from Guwahati, Assam or Siliguri to Silvassa. That's called North Indian original tea. Then there is a South Indian tea. Normally, most companies blend North Indian tea, South Indian tea, and that's how the special taste of the tea that we get comes. The South Indian tea moves from, say, Coimbatore or Kunnur. They go to Maharashtra, they get blended. Packing material may be coming somewhere from Baddi. They'll get packed and they'll come in this huge lorry, which we hate. What we don't understand is the backbone of the economy are these lorry drivers. If a lorry driver just crosses us when we drive our car, it's like a hated sight. These are the guys who actually make everything happen for us. They bring that to Bangalore and then we get our morning cup of tea. Such an inefficient logistics system we have, and the quality of, thanks to GST, some of the waiting at the octroi in every octroi, paying octroi or waiting at every check post has significantly reduced, but still it's a very, very broken system. So even on paper, every investment that goes into infrastructure will bring down the cost of what the consumer will consume, what every day we will consume. It will make us more efficient. So I am a believer that, you know, the way sometimes they say that in the government, the left hand and the right hand will not know, they won't speak to each other. The thought that they will at least make these 14 departments integrated, the thought that they will be able to communicate better, no matter how long it takes to implement, and maybe it will get implemented at 50% of the intensity, but I think it is a very good move, very good thinking. Added to that is the PLI extension. PLI will also help rebalancing capacities. With many of the tax exemptions waning out for many companies, it gives them an opportunity to go and set up closer to market, closer to maybe the point where the raw material is available in a cost-efficient way. So I believe that this will bring the cost of manufacturing, at least to some extent, down. There are, of course, a few X factors. I think inflation was spoken about. It's a big X factor. Price of oil was spoken about. Oil has a significant downstream impact into every element of cost, not just transportation. So that's another aspect we do not know. Budget has assumed very, very aggressive numbers in terms of how the oil price will pan out. And I think it was nicely pointed out saying once the elections get over, we do not know where the oil prices will take, also considering the tensions in Russia. So I think there are a few X factors here, but I think it's a move in the right direction. Now, another significant, I think, development is this digitization of health records. Again, I want to take an example of my mom. Every time, she's a doctor's nightmare. Every time she walks to a doctor, she'll walk with some 10 different files. There'll be one gynecology file, one endocrinology file, one, orthopedic file. And she'll expect the doctor in the 10 minutes to actually go through all her files and be able to give her the right diagnosis. I sometimes she's even been misdiagnosed because one doctor has not looked at some part of her file. And but I think our health infrastructure system, keeping every other aspect which was spoken up aside, digitization will bring a lot of transparency. I don't think it's something that the budget has initiated. This was announced in September when the Ayushman Bharat Digital Charter was set out. But the fact that the budget is in some form an indicator of economic intent, and the way it was spoken about in the budget, I think it will be, if it is implemented in the right direction, it will be a big step in bringing transparency in healthcare. Now, there is still that question, and I think it was spoken about that, access to healthcare is more important than transparency, and there is very little done still on that. And so I'm not repeating on that. The third is, I'll come to services sector. Now, as per the economic survey, India's share of world commercial services export increased to 4.1% in 2020. $194 billion US dollars IT BPM services contributes, 1.38 lakh employees. There was $16.7 billion of FDI that came into the sector. So this is a very important sector. But how the sector was developed, when again public intent was developed, was because they saw benefits of scale, benefits of development of a SEZ or a community where I think I'm in the middle of the IT capital, IT zone of the capital. If you see, a lot of it was developed on the backbone of setting up these closed infrastructure. Of course, now the tax benefits are done. The sector has come way ahead. It can stand on its feet. I don't think the sector needs any SOPs or tax benefits anymore. But then the sector is now saddled with all this heavy infrastructure which has been created, and all its employees are now starting to work from home. There is, of course, one part which I don't want to elaborate is how is the government going to, they gave a temporary easing on the SEZ regulations. How will they, on an ongoing basis, how are they going to administer? I'm assuming that they will administer it from the learnings of COVID, and therefore there will be more work from home. But I think now there is an opportunity for the sector to be able to liquidate its real estate, be able to use it in a more effective manner. The rules will come out. I don't think there is complete clarity on how they're going to design the rules, but from what we've heard from the FM speech and also the follow-on press conferences, I think the intent is that there will be enablement for the IT sector to liquidate its space. Just to put that in perspective, that there is a 6 lakh crore of investment which IT companies have made in SEZs. So I think it will be a good step forward for people to liquidate their investment and be able to help with the real estate capacity creation for newer businesses, domestic businesses, which hopefully will get an impetus with if the consumption cycle kicks. Now, coming home to healthcare, where I come from, I would say it is a, thoda hai, thode ki zarurat hai kind of budget, thoda hai, thode ki zarurat kind of situation also, if you look at it. We have 0.74 doctors per 1,000 people, 0.5 beds per 1,000 people, 1.7 nurse per 1,000 people, way below WHO norms. And this is at a country level. And if I then say, what is it in the cities and what is it in the, tier 2, tier 3 infrastructure, maybe it will be a rounding number if we take, smaller towns and villages. I think we clearly need more capacity creation there. It's not just about primary tertiary care, it's about talent. We have, if you look at it, 1.5 million medical students apply. There is potential in this country to learn. But I don't think we have enough teaching capacity. We don't have enough teaching beds. That I think is, when we talk about infrastructure, it's not only about roads and rails, but it's also about creating capacity for the country. I think that's a place which is a white space, which there could have been work done on that. Again, there is, because I come from healthcare, and I think given that I've got the podium, I should make this point that GST on, input for healthcare, the input is not, GST is not zero rated in healthcare. So which means that we cannot avail credit on a lot of the input GST that we have. So which means that indirectly there is cost of GST going into the patients in a country where affordability of healthcare is a big challenge. So I think something could have been done around that. Again, Ayushman Bharat was spoken about. It's a good journey. I would say the direction is right, but in the way it is being executed, I think there has to be whether it is coverage, whether it is administration, whether it is payment of dues. So it's not just about suppliers, but also, hospitals. There is some gap which I think has to be thought through. Again, preventive healthcare is very underinvested in the country, and there is very little which is spoken about preventive healthcare at all, anywhere in any policy making. So I feel that there in the healthcare sector per se, where I come from, I think maybe there could have been more, but there is no magic bullet. There will be some pluses, some minuses in every budget. For example, I think education, while the entire focus around digital education is very good, the fact is that for 2 years, most of the children in this country have missed out on learning. They've missed 2 years of useful learning life. How are they going to catch up for those 2 years of education? No matter, and I don't think India, the children in India are yet ready for digital education, no matter what is taught in channels. I think some sort of a bridge, thinking around how they will bridge education is important. I hope that the states take some initiatives around that when the budgets come through. We spoke about MSMEs. Another area is this unorganized urban workforce. That's a significant part of the country. And I think there isn't too much that the budget is giving to the unorganized workforce. So there are some white spaces. I would say there were many others which were spoken about. I would definitely appreciate the fact that the budget was not a dole out of incentives budget. It was a very, I think, courageous move to not dole out incentives in an election year. Some of the thoughts that the budget talks about, whether it is green, whether it is huge focus on digitization, whether it is connectivity we spoke about, digital currency, I think is a good step which takes India into the leagues of countries which are already thinking ahead. A lot on financial inclusion. I think very little was spoken about bringing post offices into the scope of banking. I feel it's a very good move because it ensures end of mile connectivity. For example, say my father, even now, he hails from a small village. Even now he has a small family home, his relatives are there. The nearest bank is say 50-60 kilometers away. There is no way that any medium other than cash can be transacted. So I think, and there is always a post office. We can always, communicate through letters, which of course we don't do. When I was a child, I used to write these big inland letters. You used to write in the corners and all to save space, and post it to my father's sister back in the village. Now I think the post office will enable me communicate differently, hopefully. So I think some good progressive steps are there in the budget. There is a Tamil proverb which says that, even if God is willing, the pujari may not be willing. So that's what happens in most of the execution in our country. So like most of the speakers spoke about, I think the execution is the key, and we have to see how we translate what we are attempting to put out there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Sandhya. Thank you very much. The presentations are over, and I think we should now save all the time available for the question and answer session. I think if in case we have some questions already in the chat box, we shall start with them, and then yes. I think some of us from who are present here in the auditorium can also raise some of the issues.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Your message was really informative. Maman, could you please read out the questions?
Thank you. So we have a few questions in the Q&A section. So I will direct these questions to each of the panelists as per their wishes. So one of the first questions we had was from Mr. Prabal Jain, and Professor Ashok sir already answered the question, but I hope he can repeat his answer. I'll read out the question. The government is going to borrow around 15.7 lakh crore. So does that mean that if market borrowing has to come down, the small saving and PF money has to be increased? Will the interest rate continue to be high for these small savings to be attractive for the public? Professor Ashok, if you could.
Yeah, so given the increased market borrowing that the government would have to do to fund the deficit, the interest rates of government securities would have to inch up higher. One is because there is an increased demand from the government. The other is also the inflationary effect. We're already seeing higher inflation, and the just post-budget, the 10-year government GSEC yields have already started going up. So it is already about over 6.8%, right? So in the last few months, it has gone up, and the market possibly was not expecting such a large market borrowing component of the budget. So the interest rates in the government bond market has already started going up. Partly, this is also a response to the expected tightening in the Western world, with the central banks in US and Europe also tightening monetary policy. Now, the question was connected to, will the small savings interest rates go up, right? Well, increasingly the small savings schemes, the interest rate is loosely connected with the market interest rates. Not one-to-one, but loosely, because they don't change very frequently. If market interest rates for government securities go up on a consistent basis and remain high, then the government is likely to change the small savings interest rates also.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to another question. This is perhaps the most trending question in the national public sector. Why was there no reduction on income tax? The salaried class had high expectations from this budget. Why did the budget not touch up the need for the Indian middle class? Now, although these questions were answered by a finance minister, they weren't convincing enough. I would pose this question to Dr. M. Govinda Rao for his opinion on the same.
I'm not too sure that this is the time, at a time when they would require a lot more of money. They would like to give any soft to the middle class. But there was a case for rationalization that they did not do. In fact, last year's budget actually gave two options. If you avail the incentives, there will be the rates would be different. And if as compared to the not availing the incentives, which had continued. They also increased the number of brackets. See, the best practice approach to tax policy is to broaden the base, reduce rate differences. Now, in that sense of the term, it would have been preferable to say that we are not going to have 100 objectives on tax policy. The objective of the tax policy is to get revenue and focus on getting revenue, but reduce the rates across. And then reduce the number of brackets. See, 7 brackets is not something which is, which increases the compliance cost, which increases the administrative cost. That could have been done. But then since they saw that, so the revenues have been very buoyant, one of the things that, everybody advises is, if things are doing well, don't touch it. And that is probably what they have done. And again, and we are basically talking about 5 crore people who actually pay taxes. Income tax is paid by just about 5 crore of people. I'm sorry, 5% of the population, about 6.5 crore people. So electorally, they are not very significant, in that sense of the time. So possibly that must be the reason. But I would have preferred 2 things in the tax policy as an economist. One is rationalize the rate structure and get rid of the incentives. Tax policy is not Kamadhenu. You can't really have hundreds of objectives, put into the tax policy and complicate the tax system and increase the compliance cost. And, so you broaden the base, reduce the rate. And that's what we always say. The other thing is on the customs tariff. They continue to build with the umbrellas, this and that. In fact, you see, my good friend Arvind Panagadia has even, yesterday written. saying that, you see, I mean, in his book, he has written saying that there should be 7% uniform tariff and be done with it. Today, he has tweeted saying that I would have preferred in ideal case a 0% of customs tariff, because at the end of the day, competitiveness of the economy depends upon how well you are prepared to face the competitive, international, market. And if you go on giving protection to the inefficient fellows, it doesn't really, is not going to help. And again, non-uniform custom duty, in fact, taxing the inputs lower than the output, actually increases the effective protection rate exponentially. I mean, these are some of the important things. But anyway, given the fact, that there was a trend of actually reducing the tariffs. In fact, Chidambaram used to be proud, saying that, we will have to tax, custom tariff levels equivalent to that of Southeast Asian countries. But since 2007, there has been meddling with the individual items, increasing the rates, and that's something which a trade economist would really not be happy about.
Thank you very much, sir. Mamin, you may proceed with the next question.
Yeah. So we have a question from a student. His name is Navkar Jain. His question is, as per the state governments, they say that they are not able to meet the demand of the Mahatma National Rural Employment Guarantee Act due to lack of funds, and the budget of 2022-23 stated that there was a 20% cut down of the same scheme. Now, is this not a bad indicator in future in terms of rural employment? I would direct this question to Ms. Sandhya J.
I think Professor Rao is a better person to answer this question. But my small humble opinion on Manrega is it is only a tool, tool of employment generation, yes. But it's one of the tools of putting money in the hands of people. I feel that keeping keeping some of the concerns aside on whether the infrastructure spending would actually percolate to people or not, I believe that if there is work on roads, what do we do in Manrega? Most of the time it is expenditure that is being spent on laying roads, digging wells, doing productive infrastructure work. So I believe that the policy around capital expenditure would also create employment opportunities. It will be slower than Manrega, but it would create a more virtuous employment cycle. That is my view. I may be incorrect, so I would request Dr. Rao to comment on this question.
Thank you. I think you have said it very rightly, but let me tell you the logic of why they have reduced and what they propose to do. I mean, if I understand right, the logic is that, last year there had to be a massive increase in sort of Manrega funds. Because the demand were extremely high with, because of lockdown, large number of urban, sort of workers, without any jobs, walking through miles to their villages. And then obviously they have, sort of some sort of a safety net had to be given to them. Manrega is basically a safety net. It is not really a, sort of a, I mean, I don't think there is a great deal of asset that is being generated, though, for accounting purposes, they may do that. But basic thing is, it's basically a, sort of one of the anti-poverty interventions. Let me put it this way. So now the assumption is that, this type of a, reverse migration is not likely to happen. Many of these people who were availing this Manrega is going to go back to the towns and cities where they were working earlier. Because obviously Manrega gives them only a fraction of the amount, sort of income that they used to earn. That is the main thing. But then if you ask the officials, they will say that, look, this is a demand-driven approach. You see, if you look at the whole, the right to employment, and then the thing that the details of the Manrega Act, it basically says it is a demand-driven approach. If there is greater demand, they have to give more. Now, there is always a bureaucratic problem and this and that. But then when it is necessary, I mean, obviously, if there is a greater demand, they will increase the allocation. And possibly, I mean, the supplementary demand for grant, it will come. I mean, that all depends upon how the economy functions, whether the reverse migration takes place, and whether the demand will continue to be elevated. And if it is elevated, possibly they will give additional money as we go along.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll have one last question from the online audience. This is from Abhishek Kumar. As crypto has been trending due to the budget, but in the actual budget, the word crypto is not mentioned. It comes across as virtual assets, which also cover crypto. Now, in many countries, crypto is banned, but in our country, it is treated as virtual assets and brings it under the bracket of tax purview as 30% tax and 1% TDS. So, what is the impact on virtual assets in the future? I would pose this question to any of the analysts.
Let me pick it up. See, the fact that it has not been banned so far doesn't mean that it will not be banned in the future. This is one. But then, until such times as a clear decision is taken on that, the tax people basically want to, this is only on the exchange transactions. When there is a transaction and when they realize the transaction, they basically want to tax that in the hands of the receiver. So obviously, this does not mean that there will not be banning at future. They will possibly, they're still studying RBI and basically working on that. But it's a reality, and there's a lot of transaction taking place. And since transactions are taking place, why not take the money from them?
Thank you, sir. I'll take one last question, perhaps, from Akshay Vishwanath. He would like an opinion from the panelists about the public education system that has been affected by COVID-induced lockdowns. I will pose this question to Professor Ashok Tampi.
Yeah, so thanks Akshay for this question. A very, very pertinent point. It's not just public education. I think education broadly has been very adversely affected by the pandemic, right? And we've had, particularly at the school level and even at the college level, significant number of days lost in terms of physical classes. And, so schools, even primary schools, have moved online, given that, there was no possibility of physically meeting, keeping the health concerns of students and faculty and everybody into consideration, right? So there has been, there is no doubt that in terms of educational outcomes, it has taken a significant impact. Now, what can the government do to address this issue? I'm not very clear if the government alone can do something in terms of addressing this issue, because it also is connected with digital access, right? Those who could pursue some kind of education at some level were also those who had access to the internet, who had access to a digital device, and so on. And this also, there is this inequality in our society and in every society. And this issue is not just in India, it's a global issue. And so, my thought on this is, we have, thanks to technology, we have done the, second or third best that we could do. We did the best that we could do, given the constraints available, but that's nowhere the first best option that would have been possible. But the first best is not feasible under this situation. So that's, I'm, so perhaps, I don't know if just giving more money out here would have solved the problem, because it's a generation, of 1 year of schooling or 2 years of schooling that students have lost. And how to recompense for that is not just a monetary problem.
Let me just supplement what Professor Tampi said. it's possibly one of the most serious issues of the, sort of fallouts of the pandemic. Children in the 0 to 14 age group constitute something like 35% of the population in this country. And they're particularly more, the proportion is particularly higher in poorer states. We have, all the time we have been talking about demographic dividend. This particular pandemic can turn this out to be a demographic disaster. Unless and until we really are, this is not something which the budget can do. And again, this is not something which the union government can do. It's far away. The state governments and the local governments will have to really act. Now, the surveys have shown, particularly in Jharkhand, John Reyes was speaking the other day, there was the Jharkhand government wanted to have what they call the budget gosti. And they wanted me to speak about their state finances. And John Reyes was also there. And then he was saying that they made some surveys. And according to these surveys, children in 1, 2, 3, 4 classes, they have forgotten whatever they have learned in their class. They don't know anything. Now you have to start with the alphabets again. They are not able to recognize the alphabets. Because obviously the internet, connectivity they don't have. And they are basically going for the midday meals. So it has impacted on the nutrition. It has impacted on the learning ability. Now, one of the things that he has suggested there, and possibly there's something others too can follow, is to have some sort of relearning, sort of system created in every school, so that the children are, are made to relearn what they have learned and then, proceed, further. Now, this is going to be it's not going to be an easy task. It's going to be a very huge challenge. And it all depends, and the state governments have to wake up to this. Otherwise, this is not going to be, this is something which is, but as I mentioned, it's not having more money. It's the question of getting the system in place.
I'd also like to add something to this question. I think in some form, the way we've been looking at education is that, okay, class 5 online done, class 6 online done. Now I'm going into class 7. Those 2 years is not done. We can't start with class 7 from today, like Dr. Rao was saying. And so the way we look at our curriculum has to be remodeled. So between class 7 and class 8, do 6 months of class 5, do 6 months of class 6, do 6 months of class 7, bring the child to some level of knowledge. That is one aspect. Second aspect is, I think we aren't looking at the teacher side of the equation at all. The teachers have also lost touch. And also, for example, say a comprehensive healthcare insurance for the teachers to come back to work, some sort of an incentive to make people energized to come back and teach. Also, I think we may need to think about whether the same number of teachers that we had is adequate, given that we have so much catch up to do. So what is definitely missing, and even if we look at across the state, is a clear charter on how I am going to bring people back to a certain skill level from which they can build on. I think that thinking is missing, and that thinking will come only if there is, it's recognized as a need. So somewhere I think whether it is even recognized as a need is the question.
Any questions from those of you in the auditorium? Yes, can hear that? Yeah.
My question is to Dr. Govind Rao or Professor Ashok Tampi. It's on the fiscal discipline in the budget. The expectation was that we will peg it at 6% of deficit, but it has remained at 6.4, though it came down from 6.9. At this rate, does it affect our sovereign rating? Does it affect the journey to the promised rate by 25, that is 4.2 or 4.3%? Is it the right way, or it should have been pegged at 6%?
Now, let me tell you that, considering the fact that the budget basically reduces the subsidies and increases the capital expenditures. And in the given circumstances where the private sector borrowing requirement have still not really picked up as much as, at the end of the day, the fiscal space is given by the household sector financial savings. That is the money that is available for borrowing both with the private and the public sector. Because you see, if you say, there are main three sectors: households, corporates, and the government. If you look at the government and the corporates, their investment is always more than their savings. So they don't have a net savings available. It's only the households. So households also, physical savings will not do. Household financial savings are the ones that are available. And because of the precautionary, household sector financial savings have significantly gone up now. And at the same time, private sector and the private sector, investments have not yet, they still continue to be tepid. They are not yet picked up. Now, in this particular circumstances, it is hoped that the interest rate increase will not be significant because there is sufficient amount of money available for borrowing, and then much of the capital expenditure that you do is expected to be expected to increase the private investment rather than displace the private investment. There is crowding in rather than crowding out. And in that particular environment, obviously the credit rating agencies also have good people who make analysis. And I don't think that will be it will have an adverse effect. They do look at the deficit, but then they do look at the deficit in conjunction with other things.
One more question from
the other, just a comment. One additional thing that the rating agencies would be looking for is the growth rate. So if we are able to achieve good growth rate of 8.5% going forward, the GDP, the denominator, because it is increasing significantly, right? The debt to GDP ratio will come down, right? So that is also, another part of the projections.
One more question coming from the, yes, please. Yeah.
This is a question to Sandhya madam. Okay. And she said, God is willing, but the Pujari may not be willing. But I would say the God himself is not willing. In the sense, the policy, when it is framed right, then implementation question comes. When the policy itself is not okay, then I would say very briefly, I'm a professor of economics here in XIME, and it is the problem of demand, not supply. And we focus on supply. That is a major thing. If I want to go to Chennai, I should go to, yes. If I take a train to Hyderabad, I cannot go to Chennai. So similarly, it is so clear, Keynesian economics says very clearly, you build demand, you put money in the hands of the people, they will go and buy things and business will bloom. Instead, you give concessions to the corporates, and the corporates, what do? Do they invest that money in bricks, mortar and steel? No, they buy back their shares. The capital market is booming. The real economy is going down. It is very much visible, very much visible. And I would say, it is already mentioned about the dividend, the demographic dividend becoming a liability. And I would say, if this goes, not only me, several economists say that India may become old without becoming rich. 2047, we talk about something going to happen. I would say this, if this policy is going to continue. So that is one thing. And then what about this unemployment, madam? Unemployment is a biting problem. It is staring at our faces. And we talk in a very comfortable place in air-conditioned auditorium. You go out, and I travel by bus. I walk down the roads. I see the poor people's faces. And there are beggars in Electronic City bus stop. They are not professional beggars. They are reduced to beggary because of this. And so economic policy, I would say, economic policy should be right. Not only me, you must be knowing several economists. Stiglitz, he has written today in about what happened in Argentina. We wanted to become a South Asian country, successful. Now we may end up as a South American country.
Yeah,
So
we'll have to.
I would stop here.
Yeah, we're running out of time. We already run out of time, actually. Yeah. Yes.
Maybe I know it's a very huge question to answer. So I just have two perspectives here. One perspective is in 1987, I think the size of the economy of India and China were exactly the same. And today, China is 18 trillion. I'm not saying that we are China. I think it was beautifully captured by Ambassador Ravindranath. But then I think this is a model of capital investment has worked, will work if executed correctly. So I would not discount the capital investment model to the larger problems which we as an economy have to solve. The second point I want to make is more on the lighter note. I come from FMCG, and we have this thing in FMCG which we say, we know that 50% of our advertisement goes waste. We just don't know which 50%. So I think similarly, any government policy, what we want to do, it may not land 100%, but at least 50% lands. So with that, I would probably conclude my answer.
Okay, I think we should now come to the close of a wonderful session. I think overall, we had a very wholesome learning experience this afternoon. All the three speakers together have given us a holistic picture of what is happening in the economy, in particular sectors, and at the micro level on account of the proposals in this year's budget. Professor Rao, of course, gave us the broad picture of how the budget proposals are impacting the economy as a whole. And he also gave us a lot of details of how the allocations have been made and what accounting practices have been followed by Government of India in some of these matters. While Professor Thambi has given us a picture of the issues relating to the finance sector in general and banking and credit guarantee scheme in particular. Also about housing and finance sectors and how some segments of these sectors have done well, whereas other segments have suffered. And we had a lot of insights from Ms. Sandhya, from her own practical experience of working in some of the sectors, especially her explanation of how things work in the logistics sector and what all we need to do and how probably this budget will take us towards that. Also about the impact of the PLI, SEZ, and the impact on healthcare and some of the new initiatives being taken there. Thank you all very much from my side. I should also thank Yasmin, Maman Thomas, and Lakshmi for all the support you have given. Also, Mr. Lakshman for the continuous support that he has given through this session. Yes, now on to Yasmin. Yes.
I thank all the panel members for answering the questions. I also thank Maman for helping out in reading the questions that were posted online. Now it's time for memento. I request Ms. Lakshmi to award the memento to Sandhya ma'am and sir. Thank you, Lakshmi. Now I would request Ms. Lakshmi to proceed with vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. A very warm good evening to the respected Chairman, XIME Kochi, XIME Bangalore, XIME Chennai, Vice President, Director of Academics, invited chief guests, teachers, and all XIMEans attending this session both offline and online today. I, on behalf of XIME Bangalore, let me call it the fraternity of finance here together, and on behalf of all the speakers and everyone represented here, a big hearty thanks for such a wonderful and intuitive session today. I am really gratified for having this session to deliver a vote of thanks on behalf of such an honorable audience. It was really an insightful session. Thanks a lot for giving us this precious time from your busy schedule, all the panelists, and it really means a lot to us. Further, I want to pass the gratitude to the coordinators who have done an amazing job in coordinating this event, and also this plays a very, very important role in all of our career because Union Budget 2022 is such an important matter to be discussed about. I also thank the Finitiative Club and the coordinators who have arranged for this event. I would like to place my hearty thanks to all the people who work in the background without whom this would have been an impossible discussion. Finally, I would like to conclude by wishing you all a great evening ahead. Last but not the least, I also offer my heartfelt gratitude to the amazing audience for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. Now, I would request everybody present here physically to join us with a cup of tea. It has been arranged in the same floor, so please do the same. Thank you.